All right, guys. So, look, the Democrats are basically doing their full court press now that they did the old switcheroo and Biden's out of the way. I really get the sense that Biden was an impediment to allowing Democrats to actually aggressively campaign, right? He's from the old school. He believes in that bullshit, like let's hold hands and sing Kumbaya and do bipartisanship. And even if you spit in my eye, I'm going to call you special and powder your booty. Like those are his politics. And, you didn't even get, like, this brilliant line that now the Democrats are running with, like, man, these guys are just weird. Like, you wouldn't see that under Biden, because if Biden got a whiff of that from his caucus, he'd be like, hey, reel it in, that's disrespectful. Well, this is how you play politics, and this is how you win, and this is how you get a Democratic polling surge. Now, honestly, it's not just that Kamala's doing better since she's become the one. It's also that all the surrogates are out there really fucking lashing out at the right and doing a great job of it. So, look, as you guys all know, I've been a well-known hater of a man by the name of Pete Buttigieg. He was one of my least favorite candidates in the 2020 election in the Democratic primary. He also gave me, similar to Beto O'Rourke, similar to Josh Shapiro, he gives me that I'm a knockoff Obama vibe, right? Like, I'm just going to copy his rhythm, his cadence, his flow. I'm just going to sound like Obama, and that's the identity I'm going to leech onto in order to try to get to higher office. And I don't like that. It's one thing if you do that in your first year as a politician for a lower office because you need a model, but then at some point you got to become yourself, you got to break free. And most of these guys never break free, right? Josh Shapiro still sounds like Obama. Beto O'Rourke still sounds like Obama. But guys, to my shock, and tell me if it's just me. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys tell me with your observations that you're seeing. But it looks to me like Pete Buttigieg sort of grew out of the I'm just going to copy Obama shit. And now he sounds a lot less like Obama and a lot more like Pete Buttigieg. But more importantly than that, look, for all of his flaws as being a corporate centrist type candidate, all that careerist and opportunist, a ladder climber, for all the flaws, and those are all legit criticisms. The fact of the matter is he's become phenomenal at jousting with the morons on the right with their lazy tropes and narratives. And you're going to see exactly that right here. So, by the way, he threw his hat in the ring. He wants to be VP. He had a late surge in terms of relevance. Kamala's considering, etc. But he goes on Fox News, and they're going to talk about a bunch of issues. Watch this.
Whether we're talking about choice and her stance on defending women's right to choose versus Donald Trump, who eliminated a right to choose in this country.
Well, he sent it back to the states, to be fair.
Let's be very clear. He is proud of the fact that he demolished the national right to choose in this country, period.
But there are states that are figuring this out. I mean, there are some that are, it's nearly impossible, a 6-week ban or less. But there are states in this country that allow no restrictions up until the due date of a child.
There was a national right to choose in this country, law of the land, for 50 years, which the vast majority of Americans believe was the right thing to do. But Donald Trump made a promise when he was a candidate, one of the few promises he actually kept, by the way. You know, he didn't keep his promise of 6% economic growth. He didn't keep his promise to drain the swamp.
He did have a pandemic to deal with.
But even before the pandemic, America went into a manufacturing recession, which really hurt places like where I come from in the industrial Midwest. But anyway, my point is, he broke his promise for that kind of economic growth. He broke his promise to pass an infrastructure bill, right? He said he would do that. He failed to do it. The Biden-Harris administration got it done. He even broke his promise to that January 6th mob when he said, I will be at your side when you march down to the Capitol. But he actually did keep two promises. He kept his promise to destroy the right to choose in this country, and he kept his promise on tax cuts for the rich. And if you want to know what a second Trump term would be like, I would start by looking at those rare promises that he actually managed to keep.
He did say that he wanted to get rid of Roe v. Wade, but again, send it to the states where they are hashing this out
empower the states to eliminate women's access to abortion. And also, as you know, the Republican Party continues to be interested in a national abortion ban.
Which he's disavowed completely.
Yeah, he's disavowed a lot of things. I don't believe him. Because he lies all the time.
You think that his pledge that he would not pass a national ban is one that...
It's one that's going to go down with most of the promises that he's made and broken.
He's just slapping her around, bro. He's just having fun slapping her around. I mean, he ran circles around. She was not prepared for this in any way, shape, or form. Now, by the way, on the whole manufacturing thing, he's 100% right. Under Trump, we lost 200,000 manufacturing jobs. Under Biden, we gained 800,000. And that could be because of the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act and a number of the pieces of legislation, Inflation Reduction Act. But that's the record. Man, he's making it look easy. We're not done, though. We got more.
And was she aware of how he was doing?
We're all aware of how he's doing. Our country has watched our president lead. And yes, we've also seen the fact that he's 10 years older than he was 10 years ago. But unlike Republicans, right, who in Trump's personality cult will take a look at Donald Trump and say he's perfectly fine, even though he seemed unable to tell the difference between Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi, even though he's rambling about electrocuting sharks and Hannibal Lecter, even though he is clearly older and stranger than he was when America first got to know him. They say he's strong as an ox, leaps tall buildings in a single bounds. Well, we don't have that kind of warped reality on our side.
Well,
on the contrary, the president confronted that reality in what must have been one of the most difficult decisions for an American president to make ever. And he did something that I don't think Donald Trump could even conceive of doing, which is putting his own interests aside for the country.
Well, guys, look, what were the polls? Like 80%, 70 to 80% of Democrats wanted Biden to step aside. So that's the voters. In terms of the politicians, obviously the most powerful ones with the biggest amount of sway, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, keep it real, a lot of the establishment Democrats, they were the ones that had the balls to say, all right, homie, we got to do something. Homie's got to get out of here. This is not happening. It was honestly Bernie Sanders and AOC were the most embarrassing, who were, committed to going down with the sinking ship. I mean, they chained themselves to the deck of the Titanic as it went down at record speed, right? But to his point, there is no scenario. I don't care if Trump's brain literally started leaking out of his nose. He would say, I'm not going anywhere. And the Republican politicians would be like, yep, he's not going anywhere. He said it, he's not going anywhere. They would never buck him in the way that the Democrats bucked Biden. So he's right. Look, he's right about that. There are plenty of like weird media sycophants who are kind of embarrassing, who are DNC hacks. You know the names. I don't need to say it. The kid's young. I feel bad for it. But anyway, so some of them play that role of like ride or die no matter what with Biden, but it was a very small percentage, right? And by the end, virtually everybody disagreed with them. Whereas on the Republican side, oh my God, it is no matter what Trump says, no matter what Trump does, no matter how much worse it gets, they're not going to buck him. They are never going to buck him. All right, we got one more. This one I found really interesting. Here we go.
McConnell was for it. The head of the CBP union was for it. And then Trump swooped in to kill it.
So he's talking about the bipartisan border bill where Republican James Lankford worked with Democrats. And the idea was we're actually going to do a border crackdown that's the toughest, most hard line on the border for decades and decades. It had a lot of Republican ideas. In fact, this was the criticism from the left, is that this is too far right-wing a bill. This is what Biden wanted to do. This is what the Democrats want to do. And it was Trump who jumped in and said, no, I don't want to do that. Why? Because he says, that'll make the other side get a win. I don't want them to get a win.
Not because he thought it was bad policy, but because he didn't want that issue to get better. Because if it got worse, it would be better for him politically.
And I'll ask Senator Johnson about that. Because there were a number of provisions that Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, ended up in the final product, felt that there was something they could not vote for there, and they could not move forward.
Come on. We know why they didn't move forward. They moved forward because Donald Trump swooped in. He said, I don't want Joe Biden to get a win. They felt, many of them, that it was a flawed piece of legislation that had too many loopholes and other things they couldn't support. This is how Washington Post, this is how they described the border situation. Illegal border crossings soared in the months after Biden took office and immediately rolled back many Trump-era restrictions. They go on to say the number of people taken into custody by the U.S. Border Patrol has reached the highest levels in the agency's 100-year history under Biden, averaging 2 million per year. And there's a lot of that attributed to the fact that there were dozens of things done under the Trump administration that this administration rolled back. And Vice President Harris is part of this administration and had a leading role, according to mainstream media, on handling the border. Let's get real. Border crossings are down in the wake of President Biden's executive actions that he took after Congress failed to act.
So he could have taken action.
He wanted Congress to resolve that because that would have been more durable. But when Trump came in, talked Republicans out of their own bipartisan project because he didn't want the issue to get better. Remember, the worse things are at the border, the better things get for Donald Trump. So he has a vested interest in it remaining chaotic down there. I think this also helps to explain why he didn't exactly conclusively solve it when it was his turn. But I saw something else really important happening at the Republican National Convention on the border and the talk about immigration, which we all recognize is a problem, which is they tried to paint this narrative that if you live somewhere far from the border and immigration hasn't affected you personally, you need to think that immigration is a driver of crime. That was the real message. Immigration leads to crime.
Well, there are blue state governors and mayors who say every state is a border state now. That's Democrats.
Yeah, and now they're saying, but the false message of the RNC was that this is leading to an increase in crime.
Well,
and I think it's really important that we talk about crime.
Have been very high profile about people. If they had not been in this country illegally,
this is my
people
point,
would still be
right?
alive.
Trying to make people think that crime is up when crime is down under Joe Biden and crime was up under Donald Trump. Now, I don't know how often that gets reported on this network. So if you're watching this at home, do yourself a favor and look up the data.
Well, we invite that.
Great. So if you look this up at home, you will know that crime went down under Biden and crime went up under Trump, and I think the violent crime for sure. So I think the really important thing to ask is, why would America want to go back to the higher crime that we experienced under Donald Trump.
Okay, but they also may want to ask why they'd want to go to millions fewer people coming illegal across the border, and every single person who's here and was involved with a crime, that's a life that didn't have to be lost. And I think that's the argument being made. We always appreciate you coming, and we hope you'll come back again anytime.
Thanks for having me.
And maybe as a vice presidential contender. We'll see.
Oh, that was brutal for that host, man. She was just getting circles run around her. All right, so let's break down a couple of the things that they said there. First of all, it's a total myth that Biden is in favor of open borders, which is this line that many of the right-wing politicians go with. In fact, I looked up the numbers the other day, and we talked about this the other day. It is actually the case. By the way, tell me what percentage of the population you think knows this fact, this ironclad fact. Joe Biden deported more people, both as a raw number and as a percentage, than Donald Trump. Let me repeat that. Joe Biden deported more people, both as a raw number and as a percentage, than Joe Biden. What percentage of the population do you think knows that fact? I'd be willing to guess it's less than 5%. Now, this audience is the only audience that actually knows that. By the way, go look it up. Go look it up. Again, we saw, I think it was the Cato Institute that broke down those numbers for us. And this was, to be clear, it's as of 2 years into his time in office. So that's when that data is from. Okay, so that's point number one. Point number two is the point Pete makes there is not arguable. He says, look, you guys say you want a tough border crackdown. We proposed a bipartisan bill to do a tough border crackdown. And Trump came in and said, tank it, because I don't want to give Biden a win. I want the border to be overrun so that I could use this to my advantage. So what did Biden do after that? He turned around and did more executive orders to crack down again on the border. This time he acted in a unilateral executive sense. So every step of the way, he's doing the thing that the right says they want. In fact, the right should be celebrating Joe Biden on the border. It should be the left attacking Joe Biden on the border for being too much of a border hawk, too similar to Donald Trump. She says, oh, he reversed a lot of the policies that Trump did. But you're not telling the whole story now, are you? He kept a lot of those policies in place for a long time. Title 42, the pandemic era rule that said there is no due process, we're going to ship you right out. He kept that in place for a while. Remain in Mexico, he kept that in place for a while. So again, this is how you get a situation where Biden, just like Obama's nickname was the deporter-in-chief, Biden deported more people both as a raw number and as a percentage. Now, it is true that more people try to come across the border under Biden's time in office. My guess is that's because of COVID, right? You know, when Trump was in there, COVID was happening. My guess is that made attempted border crossings plummet because people were just sort of not doing shit and staying home, and many people were under lockdown orders and they just didn't go for it. And then a lot of people started going for it. But again, is that really an argument against Joe Biden in particular? More people tried to cross under Biden than Trump, but Biden is still deporting them in large numbers. Again, this is something the right, in theory, should support, should celebrate. Now, to the crime narrative, this, again, we've talked about this before. Again, this is Cato Institute. They studied this. It turns out native-born Americans commit crime at a higher rate compared to both documented immigrants and undocumented immigrants. So in other words, the trope of like the criminal immigrant is absolute bullshit. Oh, they're more prone to violence, they're more prone to crime, and this is a fact. This is what the right believes. It's just fundamentally not true. It's not even close to true. And then finally, look, Pete said something there that I got to be honest, I never heard before. And so I looked it up. I wanted to see if he was telling the truth. He said, crime's actually down under Biden and it was up under Trump. Turns out he's right. I looked it up. Now, look, you could turn around and say, hey, the way they collect the data is not exactly right. Maybe. I'm open to hearing an argument like that if somebody wants to make that argument. And again, I think you can reasonably pawn a lot of this off to COVID, that under Trump, we had COVID. And in that moment, that led to a spike in crime because people were destitute and struggling and couldn't even go out and make their paycheck, etc. I think that's fair. But it is true. The numbers are the numbers, and the crime is lower under Biden. So Joe Biden is correct that violent crime is near a 50-year low. Republicans have argued that Biden is responsible for high levels of crime. He has responded by saying that violent crime has fallen. He's right. He's right. Over the past 6 decades, the FBI's methodology has changed in small ways that make such long-term comparisons apples to oranges. Notably, the FBI changed its definition for rape in 2013 to expand the types of physical contact that are considered rape. So again, it is a reasonable argument to say, are they collecting data the proper way? Is it actually giving you a fair picture of where the crime rate is? And if somebody wants to nitpick on that, I'll listen to it. I think that's a reasonable critique. But let me give you what else they say. There are two ways to determine which time span to use when analyzing the FBI data. It could cover either the 50 years from 1972 to 2022, the most recent 50 years available in full-year FBI data, or the 48 years from 1974 to 2022, using 1974 because it was 50 years from when Biden made the claim. We looked at the FBI data analyzed by Asher for both time spans, and using either one, Biden is right that the 2022 data is a near a 50-year low. In 1972, there were 401 violent crimes per 100,000 population. In 1974, there were 461 violent crimes per 100,000 population. Both of those data points are higher than the 2022 figure of just under 370 violent crimes per 100,000 residents. 2022 would have been the absolute lowest year of the past 50 for violent crime, except for two marginal drops below the 2022 level in 2014 and 2019. Okay. In both of those years, the violent crime rate was 364 per 100,000. Okay, so in other words, again, to be fair, they're saying 2019, which is one of the years of Trump, that year actually was as low as 2022 was. So, but here, let's look at the total. So Trump was 2016 to 2020. And, I mean, honestly, it looks marginal to me. It looks marginal. Yeah, you had technically some of the years of Trump, 390, 377, 374, and under Biden, we're at 369. So yeah, I mean, he's technically right. There's less violent crime now, according to the statistics we have. But it is marginal compared to the Trump years. But again, it does sort of fly in the face of the narrative, because what they would have you believe is under Trump, crime was like record historic lows. And then under Biden, it skyrocketed, right? And they would also say a lot of those crimes are because of the violent immigrants. Turns out that's doubly not true. The crimes are relatively similar. The crime rate is relatively similar, both under Trump and Biden. Biden's is technically a little lower. But look, more importantly, look at this. I mean, shit. People always talk about how much violent crime there was in the 1990s. There was a lot of fucking violent crime in the 1990s. I mean, look at this chart. Jesus Christ. I mean, you go all the way back to 1960. I guess maybe the very low violent crime rate, I guess maybe the data collection was even worse, if I had to guess. Or maybe it was just genuinely a lot less crime. But the 90s were fucking violent as all shit. Holy cow. Anyway, so there you have it. So, I mean, he ran circles around her. She was not prepared. And I think maybe they'll second guess the next time she's supposed to be the one pressing somebody like Pete Buttigieg. They got to give somebody who's more on his level. And to be honest, I don't know who would fit that role on Fox News, because I think he'd probably handle any of them pretty easily. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.